Hi, Prabhu.
Um, Tom, I've been reading a book on free will the last week, and the more I read through it, the more and more the understanding is that there is no free will at all. Things just happen on their own, and the doer is more like is just a function that coordinates all the activities. Give it's just a virtual entity that's coordinating all the activities. Otherwise, it's just impressions in the body and mind that's acting out on its own. It was quite interesting. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. What is your point of view on free will?
No, so I was shaking my head just jokingly when you said that you read a book on free will.
Yeah, it's okay. I
Just
understand.
just teasing you.
Yeah, I know.
um, yeah, I think the topic of free will is a very good entry point for some people into this kind of teaching, actually. Because from a scientific point of view, there's no evidence for free will. Because there's no evidence of any separation or any separate entity scientifically. If we look at us from a scientific paradigm, our current scientific theories are that essentially you have a whole load of, let's say, particles or waveforms or energies that are all interacting with each other. And there's no free will in any of that. There are laws that determine how these entities or particles interact with each other, whether they're quantum laws, the laws of quantum mechanics, or they're Einsteinian laws like gravity, relativity, Einsteinian relativity. Um, there are laws and equations that govern interaction, but there's no evidence for free will in a scientific point of view. Then you've got the philosophers, and you've got different philosophies of. Some philosophers say there is free will, and some philosophers say there isn't free will. My personal view, I looked into this some years ago, so maybe some of the philosophies progressed, but there's no good philosophical ground for free will existing. When I looked at the philosophers who tried to say there was free will, it got pretty dodgy in terms of their arguments. Doesn't mean they're wrong, but their arguments for me seem very flawed. Lots of holes in the arguments. Now, if we come to Ramana's teachings are practical. The Vedanta teachings are practical. They say ultimately there's no free will because there's no separate entity. You can't to have free will, you need to have a separate entity, which can have free will, isn't it? You need an entity that exists in a world to have free will. And that entity, maybe you can say, oh yes, this entity has free will, or this entity doesn't have free will. But you need an entity that's living in some kind of environment in order for the concept of free will to even arise, don't you? So the concept of free will can only arise if you're in a paradigm where there is a separate entity or number of separate entities living in some kind of environmental field, environmental plane, the world. And Ramana's teachings, what I'm sharing with you, Vedanta teachings, they don't accept that. They say there is no duality. There are no separate entities. So there can be no free will. The ultimate truth, according to Vedanta, according to the Upanishads, is there is no teacher, there is no seeker, there is no practice, there is no teaching, there is no guru, etc., etc. These are all illusion. These are all content. These are all Maya. But Vedanta teachings are practical. They say, okay, you consider yourself to be a separate entity with free will. It doesn't matter what your philosophy is. It doesn't matter if you believe in free will or not. You go about your everyday life as if you're a separate entity with free will. So let's say, so Vedanta just says, okay, let's just say you have free will and operate on that basis. Ramana says everything is predestined, but you have free will with respect to one thing only. He said, you have free will to decide whether or not you inquire into the self or not. Because you can choose. You can choose to inquire into the self, or you can choose not to inquire into the self. You can choose to turn within, or you can choose not to turn within. That's your choice. Because what he's saying is that you can choose to attend to the content, which is Maya, which is the objects, or you can choose to attend to the subject, which is a consciousness. That's a practical teaching. From our point of view, it's true. It's a practical teaching. It's not a philosophical teaching. It's not a scientific teaching. It's a practical teaching. But many people are now interested in this free will question in the West. And so for the intellectual types who are interested in this kind of question, it's a really interesting way into this, to realize that there's no separation but within the scientific framework. So it's sort of one step closer to non-duality, because you're realizing, gosh, I'm not the initiator of my thoughts. I'm not the initiator of my actions. I'm not the doer. I mean, of course, this has been written in the Vedic scriptures, centuries ago. In the Bhagavad Gita, famously, I think it's chapter 3 or 4, chapter 4, I think it is. It's written that the wise do not consider themselves to be the doer of the things that are done, but they realize that is the gunas. The gunas are the three energies of Maya. They realize it's the gunas that do everything. What you are is not the doer. You're that unchanging, ever-present, whole consciousness. And there's an appearance within you of all these things happening. Is that okay, Prabhu?
Yeah, that's fine.